the slides now?
Yeah,
yes,
we're good now.
yes.
All right, so I'm just gonna go through them, but I'm also just like want you to just kind of pipe in when you want to share things, and as you've been doing, so that's awesome. All right, so all right, let's begin. So yeah, I'm Kat Schrier. I professionally, unfortunately, my name is Karen, so that's what you would find me under if you do a Google search of any of my work. But I've been a full-time academic for a decade. But before that, I worked in the games industry for about 15 years as a game designer and producer and educational producer. But I've created a bunch of different free stuff. So if you wanted to take a picture of this and download it later, you can. All of the books, Learning, Education, and Games, there's 3 of them, and they're all free to download. There's also Designing Ourselves, which is a white paper that I created. And I think that my book, Knowledge Games, might even be still free if you go to Muse. So lots of free stuff if you are having trouble sleeping. So if you need, something to help put you out, there you have it. So over the last really 15 years, I've been trying to understand how we can use games to better include each other, to understand each other, to support each other, and to raise empathy, to enhance care and support ethics. These are, just really important to me as a human, but I feel like over the past year, I think we've started to realize as a society how important games are to this as well. I've been talking about it for a while, but no one, it's hard. Like a lot of people didn't believe me, like, oh, you can connect through games. But now people are starting to realize, oh yeah, of course you can connect through games. In fact, in quite wonderful ways. Of course, on the other hand, just like any community, there's positive and prosocial benefits of games, and there are quite the opposite. We see the cruelty and the toxicity of humanity through our communities as well. And games are no different. So I am in this presentation going to be focusing on the prosocial benefits of games, or at least their possibilities. But I will also talk about, where things sometimes go awry, and sometimes when we have the best intentions, we might make games that we think are going to be supporting each other and building trust and care and reducing bias, but might actually end up doing quite the opposite. So, by the way, please stop me if you have any questions. But can everybody hear me still? Someone could just shout out yes.
You good.
Yeah,
all right,
because I hear you.
The thing is, like, I can't see you anymore because I'm on like my presentation screen, and I'm afraid if I go to the other screen, it'll like cut everything off. So
yeah, it probably will.
Yeah, so just
we all turned our off anyway.
Yeah, I mean, oh, you did. Okay, cool. So I can't like read your faces and know if you're completely like what or anything. So just let me know. So I don't know if we have time for it, but I kind of wanted you to check, if you haven't checked it out, I wanted you to check out a couple games that maybe, I don't want to say they're not effective, but maybe aren't doing exactly what they set out to do. And, just to kind of see like what's out there. And one of those games is kind of like this classic game. It's been around for a long time. And every time I tell people who aren't in the games community, I'm, studying social issues and games, they always bring up this game, Free Rice. And have any of you played Free Rice already? I just want to...
Yeah, like 10 years, more than 10 years
10
ago.
years ago, right? It was
a bunch of my teachers in high school had us play it during class time.
Yeah. right? So it's like one of those games you play in high school. Your teacher's like, look, this is a really cool game. And in it, you basically are just, looking at English words and trying to figure out the definition. Like dirt means soil, right? And then you're like, wow, I got it right. And like every time you get it right, supposedly you are donating a grain of rice. And as you can see, I mean, it says 95 billion on this, but there's probably, since then it's, you know, hundreds of billions of grains of rice have been contributed. And like that's kind of awesome. I mean, you get to, like, every time you get a right answer, you're actually making change for the world. Like you're actually donating 10 grains of rice and you feel like you're helping end world hunger, and it sounds really good. But I actually have a lot of problems with this game, and I'm kind of curious what you think too. But my big issue with this is, well, yeah, we're helping to distribute some grains of rice, but like, why couldn't we have made a game where we actually taught people about world hunger and actually work together to solve world hunger, and really understood that problem, and were able to share perspectives where we could actually figure out solutions. For example, we do have enough food in the world to feed everybody, but we're not able to either store it for long enough or distribute it in the right ways. Or there's different institutions that, institutional obstacles that we have, and could we overcome those through a game? So on the one hand, I think it's great that they've donated so much rice. On the other hand, what does answering a vocab question have to do with that? And so that, to me, is a missed opportunity, especially for social change kinds of games. And I don't know, does anyone want to share their thoughts about that? Like, do you agree, disagree?
Something always put me off a bit about this game.
Yeah.
Like if they have the rice and they're able to give that for like however many people click on this, like,
yeah.
Why can't they just give the rice without having people click on it?
Right. It's weird. Right? It's like, if you've got the rice, give the rice.
Like it seems like it's giving people a false sense of like having contributed to ending world hunger, when if they hadn't gotten that satisfaction, maybe they would have gone and done something significant that was actually significant.
Yeah, it's almost like the idea of like kind of casual civic engagement, that you feel like you're making a change, but you're really not. And it almost is, it's maybe worse because you're not really engaged and you're not really learning about the problem. Like you're not learning about the problem of hunger through this game. You're learning vocab words, like, or you're just showing that you've learned them. So it is
it's like performative.
It's performative, right? It is. It's very superficial. And I think it's a very simplistic game, obviously, but it's also, I think, a simplistic way to show how a lot of games that are kind of like quote unquote games for social change are kind of like that. Like they're superficial change, or they're superficial steps towards something. And maybe there's awareness, but what change are they really making, and are they making the right kind of change? It's to me a question I grapple with as someone who works on these kinds of games. All right. And another game that's similar in structure, in that it seemed like it had good intentions, but maybe didn't quite work out the same way, is a game called Spent. Has anybody played the game Spent?
I actually taught this game over the summer.
Oh, you did?
With a whole bunch of critiques.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yeah.
And tell me about it. Tell me, what were some of your critiques?
So one was the sort of conversation around empathy games, and how, you play a game and it does not, in fact, like many people argue, put you into the shoes of someone in this situation. It only conveys some message about that situation, the same as you
Yes.
get in whatever other media forms. But the other thing that I was pointing out about it was that it doesn't actually convey what is difficult about about the situation that it
Right.
places you in, because you look at the number and you think, oh yes, this number is still above zero, therefore I am doing well,
Yeah.
and so everyone, and so very easily it's very easy to conclude from this that that oh, people in poverty are just not
Yeah.
saving their money or just not budgeting
Yes.
well.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So the
So
game.
does it not like address structural issues at all?
Exactly. Yeah. So Spent is a game where you have 30 days and you're supposed to basically budget your money. You're in a, you have these very simple choices like, should you pay for your dog to go to the vet, or not? Or should you buy your kids a new pair of sneakers? You have to pay rent. You have to budget your money, and you have to decide where you live, and work related kinds of questions. But the goal is to basically just have enough money at the end of the 30 days. But again, it's a series of choices, and you could just say, yeah, of course I'm not going to buy my kids sneakers because I got to save my money. But like, that's not realistic. If you're actually in a situation, your kid doesn't have shoes to wear, you're going to have to pay for it. Or again, like you said, it's not going at the systemic inequities that reinforce poverty or financial insecurity in different ways. So people think, oh, getting out of poverty is just based on answering a series of choices correctly, and people who are poor then just didn't make the right choices, and that's why they continue to be poor, which we know is not true. We know that there's so many systemic aspects to why people can't make the right choices or can't make choices at all. Or are there even right choices? Like, how do you make a choice between two horrible things? So it's not showing any of that, and it's not really putting you in the shoes of someone who is in that situation. And so there's actually researchers actually wrote an article. I think it was Russos and Davidio, that what happened was people actually had less empathy for people who are in these situations because of the game, because they felt like, well, they should have just chosen better. And that's not what we would want to reinforce through a game. We would actually want more empathy for people in those situations. So again, game had really good intentions, and actually also got a lot of donations for people in that situation. Actually, because of the game, you could see it says donate for Urban Ministries of Durham. They actually made a lot of money, and raised a lot of money for people who are poor through the game, because it was like one of these like games that went viral. But on the other hand, it also lowered empathy for people. So it's hard to kind of like grapple with that complexity of like, well, it could do some good things, but it's also problematic in other ways.
Yeah, I tend to like not think too highly of the vast majority of empathy games or things that label themselves as empathy games.
Interesting.
Like, like I feel like it's like most of them are very performative. It's like I can put on this experience for a short amount of time and then just take it off and discard it and move on with my life.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
especially when it comes
absolutely.
to disability simulations. Like
Mm-hmm,
that,
mm-hmm.
like that's a hot button issue in the disability community.
Yeah, actually, there was a game. I don't know what it was called, but it was. I wish I could remember the people who researched it. I could look it up for you. And they created a game which had people have to be in the shoes of someone who was in a wheelchair. And what they found was that people who did that were very, they felt really bad, and they felt really like emotionally overwhelmed by the fact that someone was in the wheelchair. But it actually also reinforced stigma and reinforced.
It reinforced the idea that disabled people's lives are like
bad. And
bad.
Yeah, they just felt so bad, and like that's not
Like,
that's not
whereas
what we want. Yeah,
like wheelchair users, a lot of them, using a wheelchair is about freedom, and it gives them the sense of like, I can actually go places now.
right.
Whereas, and
Yeah,
that's the opposite of what people end up
I know.
thinking.
Yeah.
Like people think like, oh, like they end up feeling pity for disabled
Mhm.
people. Like most disabled
Right.
people don't want to be pitied.
Exactly, and that's what the game did. It raised pity, and then and it reinforced, well, I don't want to be, near that person because they've been through this, or it's too much for me to handle. And
Like, or
that's
even like one thing that disabled people are worried about, like as a disabled person myself,
yes,
like it
yeah,
worries me that like they might think that
no,
disabled lives are less worth living and should be prevented.
exactly, right. I mean, like, for
Like,
example, yeah, no, I hear you. Like, one of my sons, he wears prosthetics, and uh it helps him to walk, but he's just like, that helps him so he can do, the movements that he wants to do. And I know he's entering kindergarten, and well, it's remote, so he's not going to be interacting too much in person, but when he does, it's like I always wonder, like, what are people going to think? But I hear you. I know he's awesome. So yeah. And then I wonder, like, how would we design a game that was showing that, like you said, the freedom and the empowerment, and also like supporting connection and understanding without, like you said, the emotionally overwhelming or pitying someone or marginalizing them further. And it is a really sticky question because it's hard to know. Games are so complex and they're messy, and you don't know what people are coming in with in terms of their own myths or their own biases. And it's hard sometimes not, like, it's hard not to replicate the biases that we have in our own social systems, because games are a product of us. And we can't, it's hard for us to just like not replicate biases that we all have. So I'm always curious about that. Like,
yeah,
how do we do that?
the main, at least partial solution, I think, of at least when it comes to things that are labeled empathy games, is having people whose marginalization is represented take a major part in making the game. And like, even just having them as a consultant isn't good enough if you're making an empathy game. Like, like I'm even struggling. I'm actually making a game about my experience of executive dysfunction and like what it's like being me. Like,
Yeah,
but I feel like there's a big difference between me making a game about my life and someone else trying to make a game about my life who isn't autistic, for example, and isn't chronically ill.
right. Yeah, I mean, how do you even express your own stories in a way that people can understand them?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's like even our own selves. It's like, how do we even understand ourselves enough to, I'm like, we live in our own situation, and we're also affected by other people's biases about our own selves. It's like, how do we share all of that? I don't know. It's good questions, and things I'm always struggling with. All right, so y'all can hear me still, right? Because I just want to make sure I'm not losing anybody.
Yep, I can hear
Okay,
you.
Yep, you're
good.
good.
All right. So I want to just go through a couple of games that I think, again, none of these games are perfect, but at least they can give you a sense of maybe they're doing some things well, or they're starting to get at some of these questions in interesting ways. And a lot of these games are probably games you've already come across, but I'm just going to go through them and share some of them with you. And I would love to hear your thoughts about them as well. All right. So the first one is kind of been in a lot of people's minds lately. Definitely been discussed a lot, especially during the pandemic and being in quarantine, and that is Animal Crossing New Horizons. And it came out like right in, I guess it was like early mid March, when it was everybody was kind of quarantining. And it was a game where you could still connect with other people. You could visit their islands. You could host birthday parties and weddings and baby showers and protests through this game, where you're doing also a lot of like very relaxing things, like collecting bugs or fishing or planting flowers or just like decorating your home. And it was just like giving you kind of like a little bit of control over the world, especially at a time when I know for myself, like we had very little control. And then also giving you just something like very relaxing to kind of get yourself away from a lot of the chaos that was happening around us. But then also a way of connecting with other people. And, since you couldn't be physically present, here's a game where you at least could be virtually present. And so I'm teaching a class right now called Ethics in Gaming, and my students this week really wanted to talk about how this game also helped them in terms of supporting their mental health when they were suddenly, forced to leave campus and to be alone and to be kind of back in their. So, again, not a perfect game, kind of also a little bit tedious and boring, and has its problems as well, but also is doing something really interesting, which is providing some connection and community. Does anyone have thoughts about that, or I'll just keep going if not?
I haven't had a chance to play the game, but I have lots of friends who have been talking about it lately.
Oh yeah,
and cool. I mean, I've heard critiques of like the capitalist way that the game works, but
you're always in debt. You're just always in debt. It's like you're always like trying to like pull up, try to get out of debt. But let me tell you something though. It's really interesting about it is that so my 8-year-old, she just turned 8, and she's been playing this game a lot. And when I started talking to her about money and value, and I just happened to be just having a discussion with her, and she was like, "Oh, like bells." Like the bells are the currency in this game, and she was like already like making analogies to how she had to make money in the game and how she had to pay off her loans, and is like it is kind of, I guess, teaching her about some problematic economic models. On the other hand, it is at least helping her to start those conversations and understand what it means to have like economic value, and at least a good first step before we could start critiquing it. And yeah, but it was interesting that she was like really picking up on that and learning from it, for better or worse. But also like we'll be outside and looking at different bugs, or looking at she'll see something and she'll be like, oh, that looks just like this bug in the game, or that that kind of butterfly, or she suddenly like knows more about that and is more interested in like the natural world, which is actually really good, because otherwise she'd just be like playing on her Switch. So it is kind of interesting how she and I also connect through the game, because we both played it so much that we can talk about like what we've done in the game, and she'll tell me like what she's working on in it, and it helps us to connect further. So even just like around the game, we've been able to connect through it.
Yeah, I'm definitely a proponent of virtual communities. Like a lot of people say that like virtual community and activism isn't as important as, or isn't as valuable as the real thing in person. That it's not real, that your friendships aren't real.
Are people changing though? Are people changing? Like I'm wondering if now they are.
Like it is I feel like it is changing. There's still people who are holding out.
Yeah.
that it's not good enough. But like I've actually been more social since the pandemic started that,
Yeah.
like, because I live in the middle of nowhere and like have no friends who live nearby. Like, I used to be so isolated, but I'm
Right.
connecting with more people than ever now.
I know, it's funny. It's like I always felt really isolated, but now everybody else is in the same boat, so it makes me feel more connected. It's kind of like this weird, interesting, like, yeah, I've been pretty much isolated for the last 8 years, but
like up
yeah.
until the pandemic, like I like a lot of my, especially my disabled friends, would talk about how people were like critical of how much time they spent connecting with people online, and
Oh,
like that's not
yeah.
real when like that's like the
Interesting.
only option they might have.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's where their support lies.
Right.
Where it's like, and devaluing that is potentially ableist.
Totally. I love what you're saying. I really connect to it, and it's true. It's another way. It's games are a community, period. Virtual or some, obviously there's plenty of games that aren't virtual, but they are communities, and there's so much to be gained from that kind of community. Obviously some troubling aspects of humanity, but also a lot of wonderful and loving aspects of humanity.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed people are innovating more than they ever have before about online connection.
Yeah.
Like I'm in some LARP communities, and we've all been figuring out how to run games online. Like I spent 3 months programming a Discord bot to allow us to run more complex LARPs through Discord.
That's so cool. Yeah, actually, I'm teaching a class through Discord right now, and it's actually exciting. I think the students are like almost more excited that they're having class in Discord. Like it's like this like active rebellion. But I feel like I feel a little bit like the excitement will wear off in a few weeks, but at least for now they're excited, and I'm excited. So all right, so this game that I'm about to tell you about is actually one of my favorite games of all time. It's a short 20-minute game that was created by a bunch of amazing students at Carnegie Mellon, and it is called Way. And I don't even know how to put this kind of game in words, but you should all play it if you haven't played it already. It's it's synchronous, so it happens with someone else, but it's anonymous. Like you just sign on to this game, and then you get paired with someone else, and you can't speak to them. There's no talking in that kind of traditional way. But together, you need to gesture to each other with your avatar to be able to complete puzzles and collaborate to get to the goal, the final goal. And it is just a beautiful game because you start to learn and teach from each other, and almost become in sync to be able to complete this really beautiful game. And then at the end of the 20 minutes of playing together, there's this moment where you finally come together in the same screen, and you can use this whiteboard to write to each other. And it's like when I watch people play this game, it's like all of a sudden they're like instant friends. Like there's something about playing a game together where you have shared goals, shared responsibilities, you rely on each other. It builds trust and intimacy in a really magical way. And friendship, it, it's friendship. It's building friendship. And it's just 20 minutes. It's just like a 20-minute game. Again, not a perfect game. No game is perfect, but I feel like it does say something about how we can be human and through play in a way that is unlike any other. Unlike any other. So has anyone played it?
No.
Okay, well,
This is the first time I've heard of it, but I looked it up immediately.
Yeah. It's just like Google like Way the Game, Coco and Company, and it really is a magical experience. All right. So this is a really interesting game. When Rivers Become Trails. It's kind of inspired like a Oregon Trail type game where you're going from one location to another, and it's based on the Cheyenne tribe, indigenous stories and activities. It's just a beautiful game. It's also so authentic. And one thing that they did really, really Beth Lepense, who's also an amazing academic and artist and designer and just amazing person all around. And she worked with uh, experts who are, actually from these indigenous peoples, like, actually working with people who are so it's not like there's like a bunch of people just like writing about other people, which I think, you can write about other people, but then you also have to work with people who are from there and listen to other people's voices and really uh, work together in that kind of way that you are authentic to their voices. And I know that, Cyril, you mentioned writing about different people's lives, and I think what they did was they worked together to share all of their perspectives and all of their different stories to create this game. All right, next game. So this is another game that's really interesting. Again, not a perfect game, but does something really compelling, and that is to share a very authentic story. And this game is called That Dragon Cancer. Probably you've heard of it. It's one of those games that no matter who you are, even when you talk about it, you can't help but just cry because it's such a powerful game. It's made by people, this couple who lost a child to cancer, and the game was created while they were losing their child to cancer. And it's in the game you experience the family and their life while they're trying to deal with their son's cancer, and then also the grief of losing their son. And you're following them with this journey. You're feeling their helplessness. You're feeling their pain. And uh, it's one of those games where you do become emotionally overwhelmed. And the question is, does it raise empathy, or does it make you feel so overwhelmed that you can't even play it? Because I know for some of my students who are going through something similar, they've lost a parent or a sibling to cancer, it is really difficult for them to play this. On the other hand, I actually have lost a child. And when I play this with my students, it helps me to connect with them better, because then I feel like I can better share my story with them. So it's interesting. Again, grappling with the complexity of things. What uh, what how do we account for all the different ways that people are going to approach a game and all the different experiences that they have. Since we are running out of time, I'm just going to keep going. I have a lot of these games, but I just wanted to share with you some more. So this is Kind Words. This is a really interesting game that came out about a year ago. It's a game where you write letters, like actual letters, to anonymous people, and then you eventually get letters back. And that's basically the game. So, for example, I wrote a letter about how I was feeling overwhelmed with finishing a book that I was writing. And then people wrote back to me kind words of encouragement for getting my book done. And I also answered other people's letters and gave them support. And it's just a really interesting way of taking on other people's perspectives, sharing those perspectives, and reaching out in supportive ways. All right. This is really interesting game that helps to explore identity. It's a game by an organization called Common Circles. And in the game, it's a card game. So again, non-digital. But what's nice about it is that it's for kids to play with each other, to see celebrities and the kinds of different aspects of their identities. And then they are able to connect to each other and to see how the identities of these different celebrities might be similar to them. So that's another interesting game. And then this game is another non-digital game. It's a role-playing game that includes cards and a really cool instruction book. And it's called Rosenstrasse. It's based on a moment from World War II when Nazis were rounding up Jewish people, and this group of non-Jewish people who were married to Jewish people said, no, like you can't take our spouses away, or our siblings or our different partners. And so this is a game where people play in pairs and they need to make choices and interact in different ways to protest this moment of trying to survive in Berlin. So very interesting game made by Jessica Hammer at CMU, and she has a associate. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name. Really interesting game. All right, this is another game that came out pretty recently by Cat Small called Sweetheart. And
I saw this one
you did
before.
Oh, cool.
At the Game Devs Color Expo in New York City.
Oh, cool.
This
All
is
right.
actually I was walking around the arcade in the left part of the map, and this is actually one of the games that's being exhibited this weekend as well.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Super cool game. Tells vignettes about living a life as a young Black woman who's interacting with school and with the workplace and dealing with different microaggressions, and how do you navigate that. So using choices in interesting ways, and also dealing with and grappling with the consequences of those choices. All right, so this is a game that's, I guess you could say, more geared for education. It was made specifically for an educational purpose. It's called Quandary. The game was created by Learning Games Network and was created to help students understand how to solve problems. What's really nice about this game that I think they do really well is they show that you can solve problems in lots of different ways. Now, in other words, that there's not just one right answer, but there's multiple ways of approaching things. And what they actually reward is how you solve the problem. So the process that you take, for example, they give you points for organizing evidence or evaluating evidence. And even if you get to a different solution than someone else, the fact that you took those steps to get there is what is more valued in the game. And I think that aspect of it is really, really interesting. And this is a game probably heard of, which is Life is Strange, Before the Storm. There's quite a few games in the Life is Strange series, and I really like them, especially for reflection. But I think Before the Storm does reflection really well in the game. And they do it in a number of ways. One way that they do it is that they actually invite you sometimes to like sit on a bench or just kind of think. It's like you sit there and it actually shows you scenes from different decisions that you made or different paths that you took, and it kind of forces you to like think like, oh, like that's been my journey so far in this game. And also another way that they help you reflect is actually through the process of making art. The art that Chloe, who is the lead, I guess you could say, your character in the game, she makes graffiti and you get to choose what kind of graffiti you want to draw, but the graffiti itself is like an act of reflection because it's always like in response to things that have happened in the game and where you are in the game so far. So it's like different ways that it incorporates reflection into the game, which I think is really nice. And then finally, another way that games are supporting, all of these things like empathy and connection and community and um, supporting engagement in humanity is also through just designing your own games, right? So like, well, there's my daughter, and she's always trying to make games through Mario Maker 2, and then she shows off her games to her brothers, and it becomes like that. It's not just about playing the games but also making the games. And I don't have too much time to go through actually the game design, but I just wanted to tell you a couple things because we only have a few minutes left. But the process of game design itself is one where we take perspectives and we have to consider other people and we have to consider ourselves and our own identity. And I studied this very question through doing a game jam. And I know, Scott, you mentioned earlier that you wanted some resources to share with your students. So let me just kind of skip ahead. What I did was I created a game jam. And Olivia, I know that you've been working on game jams, so that's awesome. And I created a game jam about identity where people had to create games about identity, and I gave them this free, by the way, this is totally free and online, this guide to creating uh, games about identity. And it kind of looks like this. And I have a link to the full guide here if you want to just jot that down. You can also Google it, just like game jam guide and my name. You probably find it, but you can also just take a picture of this. So just like to give people some principles that they could use in the games that they're creating. Again, like they don't have to use all of these principles, but maybe there's a few that might help them in creating games like this that help people to explore their own identities or to explore other people's identities. I did the game jam at 9 locations and we made lots and lots of games. I also did a whole survey with them and they had fun, which is always important. They explored their identities and others' identities through the process of making games about identity, which, the designing itself, regardless of what game they created, helped them explore identity. And they also felt better about themselves as game designers. They also felt like games were more able to support empathy and reduce bias just by working on these kinds of games. They kind of believed in games a little more. And then just to kind of keep going, just one thing that was nice was that they felt more secure and safe following the game jam. So there's something about being with other people, which we can't do right now because of the pandemic. But when we did it, they connected through just being with others and making together. Yeah.
I was going to say the nice thing about virtual game jams is that people still can make teams that way, and like I run game jams that way. They're generally hosted on Itch and are about a month to 2 months long rather than like a short form game jam. And people form teams and they work together, and then they submit games related to the theme.
yeah, I mean, that's something I forgot to say was that, so we had 9 locations that were physical, but then we also had a virtual game jam happening too. So and we did it over a week instead of over a weekend, just to, like you said, support that better. But yeah, it's great to be able to, doing a game jam is like an awesome way to connect virtually. And I actually really want to participate in your game jam. So I want to hear
Nice.
about yours. You got
And
to tell me more.
the Neurodiversity in Games Jam is running right now
Yeah,
until the end of the month.
that's cool.
And it's sort of hard to explain. Like, there's a lot of explanation on the Game Jam page. Let me put a link in the chat.
Yeah, could you? That's awesome. Or also you could also email me, kschrier@gmail.com.
I have it open right now, so I can just paste it
Yeah,
in.
cool. So yeah, I mean, one issue though with doing the game jam is that, it's like we wanted to see like this perspective taking change and like this obvious, like, wow, they're changing their perspectives and they're becoming more empathic and all these things. And like we didn't see that change that we hoped for. And we didn't see all the games like being focused on anti-bias. Like some of them were like secret identity games and things like that, which is great, but like for whatever reason, all different reasons, we didn't get the change that we wanted, specifically on perspective taking. And the question is like, well, like did we have to do something more long term? Is it the games that they were creating? What kinds of things can we do to better support perspective taking when you're designing games too? And the other issue was that some of the people were resistant. Like they didn't want to make a game about anti-bias. Like they were like, that doesn't sound fun. Like I don't want to make a game about empathy. I want to make a killing game. So it's it's like we make this intervention, but it's for like the people, the people that are like, yeah, this sounds awesome. Like they've already like, they're already like interested in that. But then there's like, maybe 15% of people are just like, I really don't want to be here and doing that. I want to do what I want to do. And it's like, how do we design an intervention for them that gets them excited about creating these kinds of games that are maybe more about compassion or care or bias reduction? And so you can download my report on this. It's totally free. And since like I'm about to run out, I just wanted to show you that based on the game jam and my research, I did create a deck of cards. And I don't know if you could see me, but these are the deck of cards. I'm going to actually like stop sharing just so I can see you a little bit.
Okay.
And then go back. And can you see this? So I created
Yeah, I can see the
a
cards.
deck. Okay. And so basically it's a series of questions that game designers can use to help them in designing their own games, that help them to like think through, how do I make sure that everyone feels included and cared about in my game? And so I have different categories like exploration and experimentation. I don't know if you could see this, but like that. Or there's categories like deliberation and communication and things like that. And then you flip it over and there's a question there. And questions like, how are we discouraging hate speech through our game? And then, and it's like gives you like tips on what kinds of things that you should consider as you're designing. And so this is free. This deck of cards is, available. We're going to put it online. Anyone could use it as like a resource for creating their own games. And to help people, it's really like a series of questions like, how do we help players feel responsible for a character? How should we handle disappointment through our game? How do we empower players? So again, it's like a series of like, okay, if you just choose like one card out of the deck, how are we discouraging negative communication? And then, random other card. Did we test the game with different types of people? Okay, so it's just questions to ask as you are going through and trying to become mindful of what kind of community you're creating through your game. These are questions to kind of help you in thinking through that. So this is going to be free. This is sort of like a prototype card deck, and we're going to be posting it online at the link, and I could give you the link. It's going to be at adl.org/designing inclusive games. It will be there eventually, and then you can also get the card deck if you wanted to print it out, but we'll also post a PDF that you can also just download to get that. So that's exciting. But I know we're running out of time. So are there any last questions or thoughts or hopes, dreams, inspirations that you want to share?
Sure. I could. Another thing I wanted to mention was that I'm really into the idea of tabletop role-playing games as a means of exploring identity. One of the games I'm working on is specifically it's centering neurodivergent and queer experiences, specifically of coming out and what's known as taking off the mask in the autistic community. The game is about that, but it's mainly about magical girls.
That's cool.
Or at least magical people of all genders.
Oh, all right.
But it's mainly meant for people who have those identities, but anyone else who doesn't, I feel like they'll also get something important out of it because it decenters their experience as normal.
That's such an interesting point, because I always think about perspective taking as like, well, you get to understand someone else. It's like this helps you in empathizing and connecting with others. But I was thinking today that perspective taking also helps you connect with yourself, because it helps you to accept yourself better and to, have that more love, I guess, and compassion for your own self, which I definitely have trouble having enough compassion for myself. So sometimes when I step into other people's perspectives and I'm like, all right, how do I put it? I guess I could better accept who I am, because maybe they're going through similar things, or they have similar anxieties, or they have similar insecurities. And I'm like, okay, we all have flaws, and I'm not so bad, kind of thing. And, I totally connect with what you're saying. That's awesome.
If you're interested in still talking after this, we could find one of the other spaces where, outside of the island area.
Definitely, for sure.
Just continue talking.
That would be awesome. So I don't want to take up more of your time, but I wanted to say thank you so much for being here and connecting and learning. And I hope that you email me, and I'll share all the things that I shared with you today, like all that free stuff. I can also just email you and send you the link so it's easier, and hopefully you'll check this out when it comes out.
Yeah, thank you for putting together these resources, and especially I'm very excited by that deck of cards. We use tools like Grow a Game and the deck of lenses to inspire our students during game jams, but what you have there is exactly what we need to get our students thinking around being critical in their game design, not just about, did you make a game about guns today, but actually the deeper questions that we want our students to think about. So I'm really excited to put that work you've done to use. So thank you for sharing it.
You know what, Scott, thank you. Because I am I'm like that kind of person. I'm like, oh, did I do a good enough job on this? I feel like, it's a prototype, and I'm still like, oh, did I write this well? I'm so critical of it. And just knowing that someone out there could benefit from it will help inspire me to feel like, all right, it's okay to put it out there. People can benefit from it, even if it's not perfect. So I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. So I don't know what we're supposed to do. Am I supposed to turn this up? I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like in the chat we're passing